Even if you only know some simple and basic music theory, but you know it well, then you can use that to understand most harmony and find a lot of great sounds for your solos. I think you're going to be surprised just how far you can go and how much you can do with a few really basic things. First, I want to look at what music theory is and how you can use it, because I think that's often misunderstood, which makes it more difficult than it has to be, and you might not realize that you actually already know a lot. One of the most important things to realize is that you use music theory to describe and understand music. It really is about describing what you hear, and sometimes people want to turn it into a set of rules that tell you what you are allowed to play, but that's not really how it works. Rules might seem useful as a way of learning, but as you'll see, being able to describe and understand what's going on is a lot more useful. And in the end, there are no rules anyway. Let me quickly show you how describing music is incredibly useful using a blues classic. Let's take this example of an Eric Clapton phrase from the song Hideaway. If you don't know anything about music theory, then he is playing magic notes that sound amazing. But if you know a little bit more, then you probably know that the song is a blues in E, and he's playing the E major pentatonic scale. And if you want to learn how to play it, then it's also useful to realize that he's starting on the 5th and then running up the scale, ending with a bend from the 2 up to the 3, so the 2nd up to the 3rd. So level by level, you go from magic notes that sound amazing to a pentatonic scale run with a bend. And it is obviously easier to learn how to play this if you know that it's this scale with a bend and not just a bunch of magic notes that you need to memorize. And all you do is recognize or describe what's going on. That's how music theory is useful. The first and most basic thing that you want to know is something that most of you probably already know. The major scale, how it's constructed, and the notes in there. Let me just change guitar. Really knowing this means that it's a lot easier to figure out most other things that you'll come across. So this is incredibly important. If you construct a major scale, then you start with a root note and then you move up in intervals of whole and half steps. So the formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So for a C major scale, then we get C, whole step up to D, whole step up to E, half step, so 1 fret up to F, whole step up to G, whole step to A, and then up to B is another whole step, and then we get a half step up to C. Besides knowing the note names, then it's very important that you know the degrees of the scale. You will see why in the next section of the video. When you improvise in jazz, then usually you are using chord symbols as a guideline to shape the improvisation. So you need to be able to translate the chord progression into something that you can actually use in a solo. And knowing what notes are in the chords is a really good place to start. There are two ways that you can approach this. You can take a root and then construct the chords from that, just using intervals. But often I find it's better to start immediately by learning the chords that you find in a scale, since those are the chords that you will also come across in chord progressions, and they are connected in a lot of useful ways that you can also use when you solo. Constructing chords in a scale is actually pretty simple. A chord is a stack of thirds, and you have two main types of thirds. Major, which is 4 half steps, and minor, which is 3 half steps. If you construct a triad from C in the C major scale, then you start with the scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And when you're playing in a scale, then a third interval is really just skipping a note. So from C, a third up is just skipping the D up to the E. So here we have from C to E, which is a major third, and then we get from E to G because we are stacking thirds. So from E, a third up is G, and here we get the G, and that's a minor third. If you create a triad from the next note in the scale, D, then we get D skipping up to F, so that's a minor third, and then from F to A, that's a major third, so we have D, F, A, which is a D minor triad. All the triads are major or minor, except the one from the 7th note in the scale. In this case, B, D, and F. So you have two minor thirds stacked on top of each other, and this is a diminished triad. In this case, B diminished. In this way, you can construct the diatonic triads of a major scale. So for C, that would be C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. Remember that this order of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished is the same for all major scales. So for E flat major, you get E flat major, F minor, G minor, A flat major, B flat major, C minor, E diminished, and E flat major. And again, I think you want to just know this automatically for all the keys that you play in, if not for just all the keys. Triads are a great resource for solos or for comping, so this is more than just theory, because you can use, for instance, E minor and G major to play some great lines over a C major 7 chord, something like this. And later in this video, I'm going to show you how to find those triads for a chord. But first, we need some 7th chords, because that's sort of the basic chord type for jazz. Now you already know all the triads, and all you need to do to get 7th chords is really just to add the 7th, which is just stacking one more third in there. For a major scale, you only have 2 types of 7th interval, a major 7 and a flat 7. In this way, we can start with the triads and then add a 7th for each chord. So we get C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, and B minor 7 flat 5. So now you have the diatonic 7th chords in a scale, and you can find them for any key. But again, this is stuff you really want to know in all keys. Try practicing the diatonic chords in all keys, and also just move around simple common progressions like a 2-5-1 or a 1-6-2-5. When you improvise in jazz, then you usually take the chord and find material that fits to that chord. Let's look at a great way to find a lot of material in the form of triads and 7th chords for any chord that you come across. This concept is incredibly powerful and also surprisingly simple, and all you need to do is just write out the scale in a different way. So if you check out solos by great jazz players, then you'll notice that they're using a lot of other arpeggios on top of chords. And actually, there's an easy way to figure that out. Usually you write out a scale in steps. So C major is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. But now we want to find triads and arpeggios that fit with a chord. And chords are built in thirds. So maybe it's a bit more practical to write out the scale as a stack of thirds, like this: C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C, E, G, B, D. Now I wrote out a few octaves because that makes it a little bit easier to find a few different chords. Let's say that you have to improvise over a G7. You just need to find triads and chords that have a lot of common notes with G7, because G7 is what the rest of the band is playing, and if you play those notes, then that sounds good. The G7 is here, but you can see that the G major triad and the B diminished triad are both just a part of that chord. Now B half diminished are almost the same set of notes as the G7, and the D minor triad also looks promising. The E minor 7 could work as well, because that's a G major triad with an added E. So each of these arpeggios and triads are really just flexible melodies that you can start working with in your solo, combining them and using them in different ways to just play more interesting things. Now you have all these options, and you need to start working on improvising with the arpeggios. So check out this video where it's applied to a jazz blues, and you can play some amazing things with arpeggios using some very basic but also very strong concept and adding some interesting rhythms while nailing the chord changes.